Good evening, everyone. Good to be back together again. Absolute lovely day today. A little on the hot side, also on the humid side, but I guess that's August, right? We should expect that. This morning's songs, I don't know if you picked up, they were a little bit maybe eclectic. I don't know. Michaela picked them out. So just FYI, if you liked the songs, congratulate her. She picked out those songs that we sang this morning. So tonight I want to talk with you, the topic is Count It All Joy. It's about Christians and suffering. Before Carol and I moved here, we worshiped at a congregation in Baytown, Texas, and there was a young lady there. She was in her mid to late 20s, I would say closer to late 20s, and she had 4 children and developed a type of brain cancer. She almost died. I'm happy to report, I'll tell you the happy part, she's still alive today. But for a few years, she underwent some radiation treatment, some cancer treatment on her brain. And I don't think she was expected to live. The prognosis was not good. And people put together a fundraiser for her. And the phrase that she wanted, they had t-shirts made, it was "Count It All Joy." And I remember thinking at the time, why? Why would you count it all joy? I know the scripture, and we're going to read it, we're going to discuss it, but why? Well, bad things happen to good people. If you live long enough, we're all going to endure some type of pain and suffering. And the Bible teaches us how to handle the pain through stories, examples, and commands. It doesn't mean that as Christians we will always welcome suffering. But we need to better understand why suffering is a part of the Christian's life and how we can cultivate an attitude of counting it all joy. Here's the verse, James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness." Joseph suffered physical, mental, and emotional agonies. You know Joseph in the Old Testament. Including false accusations from Potiphar's wife to imprisonment as an innocent man. But Joseph believed that God allowed the suffering so that he could fulfill God's plan to save many, many lives. Maybe the entire world at that time was saved by Joseph's management of Egypt's economy. Was he ready for that? Who would be ready? Who is ready to manage the economy, and who is ready to take the tremendous responsibility of planning 7 years worth of food for maybe the entire or most of the world at that time? You know, he must have felt discouragement and wonder as to why this was happening to him. Think about this young man who was sold, beaten, and put into a pit and sold into slavery. You know he must have felt tremendous discouragement. But suffering, we know that it often results in doubts, anger, and sorrow, as well as emotional and spiritual turmoil. But steadfastness? Are you telling me that suffering is good for me? When bad things happen to good people as humans, we can't help but feel hurt, sad, and question why. But James tells us it produces a steadfastness in our faith. How? Why? Is suffering truly good for me? Before we get too far, I want to be clear here. I think once trials come upon us, it's maybe not too uncommon for us to want to blame God. Why me? Why would you do this to me? Again, as a human, we may be tempted to blame God. Remember, Abraham questioned, "Shall the judge of the earth not do justice?" Moses asked, "Why have you done evil to this people?" So there are Bible characters who question things, just like we would when these things happen. But we know that God is justice. He is peace. He is love. So why am I suffering? You know, as Christians, our ultimate desire should be to know and to love God more deeply. Suffering is a gift from God, given out of love. This might seem counterintuitive, but suffering has a purpose in our spiritual growth and development. I'd like to read 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 10. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content in weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul knew from personal experience that weakness and suffering always reveals our soul. Suffering acts as a mirror, revealing our true thoughts and desires. Christ also, he sympathizes with those suffering, drawing near and offering reciprocal sympathy, and deepens our connection with him. But how are we closer to God? Through suffering. I want to read here a quote of C.S. Lewis. He wrote a couple books on suffering. And if you know about his life, you know he knew a lot about grief and suffering. In this quote, he says, I suggest to you that it is because God loves us that he gives us the gift of suffering. Pain is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. You see, we're like blocks of stone out of which the sculptor carves the forms of men. The blows of his chisel, which hurt us so much, are what makes us perfect. He says pain is a megaphone. Pain and suffering are ways for God to get our attention. When we're comfortable and content, we might ignore deeper spiritual truths to our need for God. Pain, therefore, serves as a wake-up call, urging us to seek God and to reflect on our lives. As we suffer, we can look at other examples of suffering. Job, Joseph, Ruth, and Christ, and how they handled it, what happened, and how they responded. Or we can look inward and just look at ourselves and feel sorry for ourselves. Pain causes us to take stock in our faith. Who am I? For what do I stand? Whom do I serve? These are questions that those that are not suffering don't often ask of themselves. We need to ask those questions. Be ready. We are all going to endure pain and suffering. If you haven't, just wait. It comes around. Some more deep than others. But pain causes us to ask these deep questions. It's a transformation. The process of being sculpted is painful. As Lewis writes, he's talking about the sculptor hitting on the object, which is us. It's necessary for our transformation. The suffering we endure is what helps to refine our character and bring us closer to the ideal that God envisions for us. Remember, Joseph endured hatred by his brothers. He was sold into slavery. He spent years in jail for not sinning. You think he had maybe some regrets? Maybe if he just Potiphar's wife, okay. And he does that, he didn't go to jail. He was forgotten. Remember, he interpreted the dreams and they got to get out of prison and then he was forgotten. Joseph had every reason to say, woe is me. This is terrible. I hate my life. But it took all of this and more to transform Joseph. He was the second most powerful man in Egypt and was responsible for the entire Egyptian economy to prepare them for a worldwide famine. Did it hurt? You bet. You know that the hurt from his brothers, from day one, the jealousy they had of him, the hatred that they had for him, that had to have hurt. You know he didn't like it. No one signs up and says, yeah, make me the object of everyone's hatred. We don't do that. We want to be the object of everyone's adulation. But could he have saved the world at that time? Certainly that entire region was saved by Egypt. Could he have managed the economy of Egypt without going through all of this pain and suffering, without God being on his side, without acknowledging God being on his side? Could he have done it? Joseph was transformed through all of this into the man that the world needed. The world needed him at the time to save the world. Could he have done it? I would say no. He needed the suffering to transform him from a shepherd to a world leader. You know, we're familiar with Romans 8:28. It says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. God uses these ups and downs in our lives to refine our faith, to strengthen our endurance and develop our character. We're being conformed to the image of Christ when we go through these things. Think about what Jesus went through, and he did it willingly. We read this morning that he could have called legions of angels and taken him up and taken him to heaven. Think about what we know about heaven and how amazing it was. He wouldn't have had to have had nailed to the cross. The scourging, he could have avoided all of that. He knows suffering. Christ knows it. So when we are suffering and we're going through this, we're being made almost like the image of Jesus. The person we become will be better. We will be better able to handle future calamities. Trials strengthen our faith. Our trials are never haphazard or meaningless. They are intended by God to strengthen our faith and to teach us what it means. Listen to this. To teach us what it means to depend on Him. I think I could just say trials cause us to depend on God, and I could sit down and that might be the best sermon I could possibly preach. But that's what they are. It teaches us to depend on Him. When something bad happens in our lives, what's the first thing we do? We pray. I remember several instances in my life. One time, I don't want to embarrass Claire, but she was taken to the hospital and we didn't know what was wrong. And we were all afraid that it was something very, very serious. And the first thing I did, I started crying, but the first thing I did was I prayed. Same thing happened to my son. At age 2, he had his first seizure. And Carol called me and I was in a meeting and I had to sit down and I cried and I started praying. Why is it when bad things happen, the first thing we do is pray? Why? Answer that in your mind. Why do you wait for bad things to happen before you become holy and want to start communicating with God? Why do we wait? Why, when things are going well and we're making money and we've got the car we want and we've got all these wonderful things, do we not thank God and continually pray to Him? When something nice happens, why don't the first thing we do is bow our heads and say, Lord, thank you so much? Why? You remember 9/11? If you were alive then, Carol and I, this is so strange. We sold a house. We moved from Beaumont, Texas to Baytown, Texas. You probably don't know where that is, but so our very first service in Baytown was Wednesday, and I think 911 was Monday or Tuesday, I don't remember. But they had a flood of visitors. They had they had a brand new building. It was their first day in the new building, and it almost filled the building. Why? Why? Because when bad things happen, the first thing we do is we appeal to God. Please save me. Please rescue me from this. Please help my son. Please help my daughter. Please help my parents. Please help my grandparents. Please have mercy on me. Why? Why do we wait? Trials remind us of our frailty and our not so eternal physical nature, but eternal spirit. We want to live in heaven. We know God can intervene if He wants. We know God has the power if it is His will. We know He can fix it. So the first thing we do is we go to Him. But when times are good, we don't. Your paycheck comes in on Friday. Do you bow down and say, thank you, Lord, for another 2 weeks of pay? Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit more about C.S. Lewis. Again, he wrote a couple books about this. And I love the way that he's going to tie love and suffering together. You're going to think, what? Love and suffering go together? His books are amazing. I highly recommend them. I didn't start reading C.S. Lewis. Kyle was going to, in a high school class, and he gave me one of his books. And I thought, oh, I'll read that. You know, he knew it. Least I could do is try to learn what my son knew. But they're transformational books. And Lewis is going to teach us that love and suffering go hand in hand. So that's what I hope over the next few slides that I can establish here. He says, why love if losing hurts so much? I have no answers anymore. He's writing this at the end of his life. Only the life I have lived twice in that life, I've been given the choice as a boy and as a man. The boy chose safety. The man chooses suffering. The pain now is part of the happiness then. That's the deal. So as a boy, he chose safety. What does that mean? That means he did not want to fall in love because he knew there would be hurt. He knew he may live longer than her. He knew that they would get into an argument and he would be hurt, or he might hurt her. He was afraid. He was afraid to have a relationship with a woman. But as a man, he chose suffering. And it's not what you think. It's not that old joke, the engagement ring, the wedding ring, and then the suffering. That's not what he's talking about. He's saying that when you enter into a relationship with another human being, there will be suffering. C.S. Lewis did not get married until he was 58 years old. As a young man, he chose not to pursue a woman, or did not have the courage to do so because he knew it would break his heart eventually. But as a man, he knew it was worth it. He likens love to suffering because all relationships have tough times. All husbands and wives hurt one another, and sometimes it's intentional. Eventually, one of you will die first. Why even have a relationship when you know you will suffer? Why do it? Indeed, Lewis' wife died 4 years later. She died of cancer. He was devastated. He wrote that love involves suffering. It always does. But love is worth it. Think about your relationship with any human being. There's pain. There's pain involved. Even me. But there really is. There is pain involved in every relationship. So love and suffering, they go hand in hand. But why? Why have those relationships? Because of the value of love. It's worth it. Ultimately, the value of love outweighs the pain of loss. By choosing to love, even knowing it might lead to suffering, there's a profound importance and worth of love in human life. Lewis said of love that it has no survival value. Rather, it is one of those things that gives value to survival. Will you allow me to read that again? Lewis said of love, it has no survival value. Rather, it is one of those things that gives value to survival. Love anything, and your heart will be wrung and broken. If you want to keep your heart intact, give it to no one, not even an animal. You can see how suffering and love are connected. You simply can't have love without suffering. Another Lewis quote, the problem of reconciling human suffering with the existence of a God who loves is only insoluble so long as we attach a trivial meaning to the word love. We want to think that a loving God would not allow us to suffer. But now we know that that just isn't true. Would you want a robot for a spouse when you get home? It does everything that you could ever dream of? Can parents raise a child without discipline or making them suffer? My children always thought, oh, my parents are horrible. They're mean to me. Can you raise a child without discipline? You see, even a child has suffering in their relationship with their parents. Of course, we can't raise children without suffering. Of course, you don't want a robot for a spouse. Who wants that? Because love involves suffering. Do you see how suffering and love are connected now? God's love for humanity includes allowing us to experience pain for our ultimate good. Think back to Joseph. You think that was an accident? Do you think Joseph endured all that stuff and that's just a haphazard, random story? Or was Joseph molded and transformed and chiseled into the man that our world needed? Just like there's pain and hurt in human relationships, it will likewise be present in our spiritual life. All pain is worth it because of love. You love your children and your spouse. You simply cannot have human relationships without suffering. Our relationship with God isn't very different. Only we are the children, and we hurt Him with our sin. We suffer in sin. Have you ever seen someone in sin and you think, man, they need Jesus so badly? You ever seen someone living in the world and they can't escape and they're miserable? They're suffering. That's you and I when we sin. And God is the parent in this. But again, why have that relationship? Is it worth it? Well, yeah, it's worth it. It's worth it. Can you see the parallel? That suffering and love are connected. So here's the reward. So suffering and love are connected. Bad things happen to good people. We've seen it. You've experienced it. But why? Why? Why do we go through this suffering and transform ourselves? Well, here it is. Though we are unworthy sinners, out of his great love for us, God the Father sent his Son to die the death we deserved. And he rose from the dead so that we could be forgiven, declared blameless in the eyes of God, promising all who put their faith in him and obey Jesus will receive eternal life. The great reward for loving and serving God is heaven. Jesus defeated death. We ought to have a holiday for this. We don't have to worry about hell, damnation, or eternal suffering because we are loved by God. We can and do suffer on earth because love involves suffering. But in heaven, suffering will be no more. Death is not an end. It is a temporary interruption in the journey of life. When a family member dies, it hurts our heart. We're going to miss them. Maybe they suffered and we watched them being eaten away by cancer. But that is just the beginning. You see, this little life that we're living right now, it's infinitesimal. Did I say that right? It's tiny. It's nothing compared to eternity. Eternity is everything. We measure our life and our success by what we achieve here, but that's foolishness. It's foolishness because eternity is everything. Death is not an end. It's just a temporary interruption in this great journey of life. Heaven is stunningly beautiful city. The Bible describes it. And I think it's put in those terms so that we can understand it, but it really is probably something else. My guess. I could be wrong there. But I think it's written the way it is so that we can envision something so amazing, so beautiful. It's stunning. We can't even describe how beautiful heaven is. It's a place of peace, joy, and fulfillment where every tear will be wiped away. Have you seen that place on planet Earth? Have you seen this place of pure joy where there is no sadness and there's no suffering? You haven't because it doesn't exist, but it is. It's in heaven. We must do every single thing we can to live in heaven. The type of love God exhibits cannot be described by man. It's Southeast Texas famous saying. There's a preacher, his name was Russ Bowman, passed away a few years ago, and he was famous. He said it all the time. If you missed heaven, you've missed it all. We worry and we're working and we're trying to build this life here on earth, but it's just a tiny little speck on this great timeline of eternity. We need to do everything we can to get to heaven. We need to do everything. That means obeying Jesus. It means studying the Bible, learning what we need to do, and then changing. And it's a continuous process. You don't get baptized and go, sweet, I'm done. That's it. It's on and on and on until we breathe our last breath. But death is not an end. If you think that death, this is it, and you're going to be mistaken. You're going to be disappointed. If you think the glory of life is here on this earth and that we need to go get all that we can, live, eat, drink, be merry, you're wrong. You're dead wrong. And you're going to be sorely disappointed when judgment comes. I think about Caiaphas when we were talking about in Bible class this morning. Talk about a very disappointing meeting that's going. He's not going to like what happens. You know, kind of transitioning, trials are painful. James is not saying that we pretend as if we aren't hurting or grieving. It hurts. Think about the trial that you just went through. It hurt. Maybe you shed a lot of tears. Maybe you said a lot of prayers. Maybe you didn't know what was going to happen. You couldn't see the end. And that caused a tremendous amount of anxiety and depression and sadness. Right? Trials hurt. The transformation that C.S. Lewis described, where the artist is chiseling away, that hurts. Transforming is not supposed to be some mild process where somebody snaps fingers and poof, I'm an amazing man who everyone would admire. And I'm the one who can get you out of the world, out of poverty and manage Egypt's economy. No, it hurt. What Joseph went through is terrible. It'd be terrible for any of us to have to go through. And it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel sad. I don't want you to think that because James wrote that it makes us steadfast and it makes us stronger that we can't cry. The Bible teaches us it's okay to weep with one another. Romans 12:15, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. We are here as brothers and sisters to provide emotional support for one another as we endure suffering. In weeping together, we are unified, strengthened, and we demonstrate God's grace to each other. That's one of the reasons we need to be here on Wednesday night. We need to be together as much as possible so we know what's going on in each other's lives and we can be there for one another. Have you ever seen someone at services? This happened to me years ago when I went up and introduced myself and the guy said, man, I've been a member here for 10 years. And I was embarrassed, but I never saw him. The guy never came. If we're not coming continually and spending time with one another, how can I weep with you? How can I rejoice with you? How can I encourage you? How can you encourage me if you don't come? If we don't spend time together outside this building, how can we do this? Another principle here that we learn is longing. James is teaching us to take our tears and turn them into longing. The pain that we endure reminds us that this world is broken and it's not our home anyway. We must develop a longing for heaven. If you know me, you know I love nature. This world that God created, I think, is so beautiful. But it pales in comparison to what heaven is. When we see the hurt and the pain that people are going through, heaven is not that way. Heaven is a place of joy, beauty, and communion with God. It is better than anything and everything on earth. Just ask Solomon. Solomon was the richest man the planet has ever seen. I don't think there will ever be another man to amass that kind of wealth. And if you read his writings, it wasn't a good thing. And what was the summation of all things? I'm going to say it a little bit differently, but don't put your hope here on earth. He didn't like it. Put your hope in heaven. That is the summation of all things. Trying to find happiness here, he says it's like grasping for the wind. You can't do it. You're not going to catch it. But that joy and that promise of heaven is what we should strive for. That is what we should be grasping for. Again, Solomon had all that wealth. He could have tried everything and anything. I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm thinking about the next fun thing that I'm going to do. I want to go down to Eminence and see all the pretty blue water. I want to go back to Elephant Rock. I want to go see the music, the Lewis and Clark Museum. I want to go see all these fun things. But really, what should we be building? Solomon did all of those things. And we can fast forward. We can see it. We can read it now and know it. Don't waste your time trying to find happiness on the earth. It doesn't exist. Maybe happiness isn't the right word, but satisfaction and fulfillment. You're not going to find fulfillment on the earth. It's only with God. It's only with Jesus. It's only in heaven. The earth is suffering. Heaven is rejoicing. So remain steadfast. As we weep, our faith remains steadfast because of the unshakable joy that is produced in our hearts. We know that even the suffering is meant by God for our eternal good. It's hard to stomach. No one signs up for suffering, but we know it is for our eternal good. James tells us that suffering produces steadfastness. It draws us closer to God. It strengthens us. It transforms us. It is a part of love. We will be different, ready for something more. It reminds us to look to heaven. Suffering, while painful, is a crucial part of our spiritual journey. It helps us grow, become more aware of our need for God, and ultimately become the people that we are meant to be. We must view suffering from an eternal perspective. The pain we experience in this life is temporary compared to the eternal joy and fulfillment promised by God. I'd like to conclude and read a little quote from Mere Christianity. This is a different book that C.S. Lewis wrote, not necessarily about suffering, but he's talking about building and what God is building in you. And I will close on this. He says, imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps, you can understand what he's doing. He is getting the drains right and stopping the leaks in the roof and so on. You knew that those jobs needed doing, and so you were not surprised. But presently, he starts knocking on the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make any sense. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he is building quite a different house from the one you thought of throwing out. A new wing here, putting on an extra floor there, running up towers, making courtyards. You thought you were being made into a decent little cottage, but he is building a palace. He intends to come and live in it himself. That concludes my thoughts on maybe C.S. Lewis's thoughts that I've ripped off on suffering. I hope you have a better understanding and appreciation for it. Again, none of us wish for it, but we need to be ready for it and understand what is trying to be accomplished. Understand that we don't blame God for these things, that all love, all relationships involve suffering. And if we want to be in a relationship with God, well, we're no different, and we need to expect it. Thank you kindly for your attention. We now will prepare to sing the song of invitation and make this opportunity available for any who would like to confess or to be baptized.